Hamas, to my great regret, is Israel's creation. Ibn Cohen, a former Israeli religious affairs official who worked in Gaza for more than 2 decades, told the Wall Street Journal in 2009 that the Israeli official says that Israel would be happy if Hamas took over Gaza, because that's why the ultra-nationalist Israeli finance minister called Hamas an asset.
הרשות הפלסטינית היא נטל וחמאס הוא נכס.
A horrifically ironic. On October 7th, Hamas invaded Israel. However, the conflict doesn't start from here. To fully understand the conflict, you need to know the history of how the borders went from this to this, and why are they fighting, and how a British promise later turned into Israel, and how Israel and Hamas were made, and how Israel and Netanyahu helped Hamas, and about Israeli-Hamas conflict, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or Arab-Israeli conflict, and how it got started, and how they got close to peace in 1933 but failed, and almost all the suffering in between. It goes back to the 1900s, but then it belonged to the Ottoman Empire. It was religiously diverse, but mostly Muslims and Christians, and a small number of Jews lived there peacefully. But things were changing. More people in the region were developing nationalism, a sense of being a Palestinian, a distinct national identity. At the same time, in Europe, more Jews were joining a movement. For more than 2 millennia, Jewish people around the world were persecuted. And to escape this persecution, an ideology rose up. Zionism, a political movement, took a big step forward with an Austrian man with a mustache called Theodor Herzl. In 1896, he published Der Judenstaat, or in English, The Jewish State. And Herzl didn't just write. The next year, he organized a conference in Basel, Switzerland, the first Zionist Congress. In the book, he said the only way for Jews to avoid persecution was not just to leave, but to have their own country. But the big question was, where? Several places were proposed, somewhere in Russia, the US, Australia, Argentina, and many more. But Palestine of South Levant was chosen because of historical and religious reasons, hence by some Jews sometimes called Promised Land. During World War I, Britain made conflicting promises. On one hand, to get the support of the Jews, Britain signed the Balfour Declaration, in which it promised its support for the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine. One thing, Britain, a little tiny insignificant detail, you didn't ask the people who live there. Oh really? They referred to them in the declaration as non-Jewish communities who will be given some rights. On the other hand, Britain agreed in the correspondence that it would honor Arab independence if Arabs revolted against the Ottoman Turks. So the Arabs militarily revolted. And after World War I and the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the land was partitioned. So we get this land and we get our independence. No, you don't. What? The UK and France divided the area under another secret agreement, an act of betrayal in the eyes of the Arabs. So they drew the borders. This looks right, a little like this and this. This doesn't take into account languages, groups, or religions, or resources and population. It protects my interest though. So, amazing. However, some modifications were made, and afterward, the British got control of several regions, one of which being called the Mandate for Palestine, which was further divided into Emirate of Transjordan and Mandatory Palestine. At first, the British allowed Jewish immigration. The migration helped Zionism gain steam, and a slogan took off: a land without people for a people without land. Quite poetic. However, the land had people, and tensions between Arabs and Jews were growing, and both sides were committing acts of violence. And by the 1930s, Arabs revolted in Palestine, and the British, along with Jewish militias, defeated the Arabs, and as a result, at least according to one estimate, 10% of the adult male Palestinian Arab population between 20 and 60 was either killed, wounded, imprisoned, or exiled. Estimates of the number of Palestinian Jews killed are up to several hundred. This, alongside increasing hostility, fractured Palestinian leadership and their militia while giving crucial support to pre-state Zionist militias like the Haganah. So we have successfully suppressed the rebels, and Arabs are angry with us. So what should we do? I think maybe drawing. I want to see my drawing skills. No. To draw borders such that both are happy. I will make borders so good. Are you guys dumb? We should find a real solution. Henry, you genius. Drawing borders it is. You are following the tradition. After the revolt, the British, to decrease the hostility between them, drew the borders. Long story short, it made everyone angry and didn't work. Told you so. So what should we do then, Robert? We should limit Jewish immigration. Not bad. We'll make Arabs not angry at us. And then the British began limiting Jewish immigration, and then the Jews felt betrayed, and their militias brought insurgency and fought both the local Arabs and the British. But soon everyone was distracted by... Then came the genocide of the Jews, in which 6 million Jews were killed, more than half of Jews in Europe, leading more European Jews to flee to Palestine and getting the support for the world for a state. In the early 1900s, only 6% of the population were Jews, few of which were local. The Jewish population rose quite a lot during British Mandate era, from being 11% in 1922 to around 17% in 1931, and then around 32% in 1945. Jews with their militias, the largest being Haganah, while Haganah themselves refrained, the other militias fought the British, which was exhausted by World War II. What should we do now? Anything we do makes everything worse. Sir, don't you dare say anything. Third time's the charm, right? Or as many numbers are like. Sir, what about Greens problems of the United Nations? You give something useful for once. Due to a United Nations investigative committee in Palestine, the Haganah briefly worked to suppress other militias' operations. The UK handed the problem to the newly formed UN. The UN proposed that mandatory Palestine be divided into 3 divisions: an Arab state, a Jewish state, and a UN-controlled international city of Jerusalem, as Jerusalem was important to both Jews and Muslims as well as Christians, hence would cause conflicts. The plan was to give Jews a state and Palestinians a state and resolve the conflict. So the Arab state was to get 42% of the territory, the Jewish state 56%, and the remaining 2% would become an international zone. So a vote was held and 56 countries voted. 33 in favor, 13 against, and 10 abstained. Zionist leaders accepted the plans tactfully. In 1938, Ben-Gurion said, "I'm not satisfied with part of the country, but on the basis of the assumption that after we built up a strong force following the establishment of the state, we will abolish the partition of the country and we will expand to the whole land of Palestine." They hoped to use their state as a base so later they could conquer the whole country. Similarly, Flappen states that Zionist acceptance of the resolution in no way diminished the belief of all the Zionist parties in their right to the whole of the country. Nonetheless, the Jews kind of tactfully accepted the plan and celebrated it. However, Arabs rejected it outright. Concerning the welfare of Jews in Arab countries, a number of direct threats were made. Jamal Husseini promised the blood will flow like rivers in the Middle East. Iraq's prime minister told British diplomats that if the United Nations solution was not satisfactory, severe measures should be taken against all Jews in Arab countries. Most Arabs supported one-state solution, and also they rejected on the basis that in addition to the Arabs forming a 2/3 majority, they own a majority of the lands, and Jews only control 6% of the land. Still, the Jews got 56%, which arguably was fertile land all given to the Jews. To the Palestinian Arabs and other Arabs, this was unfair. So a civil war broke out. The Jewish forces, being better equipped, organized, and more experienced, defeated the Arabs, and massacres took place that will be later called the Nakba, meaning the catastrophe. On March 10th, a couple of months before the British mandate would end, Haganah adopted what was called Plan Dalet or Plan D. On paper, the main goal was to gain control of the Jewish state while also defending Jewish settlements outside the borders. Outside of the UN-proposed Jewish state, the majority of these operations took place.
If there is no resistance, presumably a Jewish person will be picked in each area to take charge of governing all the captured villages and towns. In case of resistance, the population to be expelled outside of the borders, villages emptied, and for the occupation and control of the Arab villages along main transportation arteries. Instructions that called for the destruction of Arab villages by setting fire, blowing up, and planting mines, especially those population centers that were difficult to control. Many massacres occurred during the Civil War. The majority of them were on Arabs, with some on Jews. One of the most widely publicized village massacres happened here in Deir Yassin. Deir Yassin declared its neutrality between Jews and Arabs. It was a village of around 600. It was near Jerusalem. There was a blockade of Jerusalem by the Arabs. The Jewish militia sought to relieve the blockade of Jerusalem by the Arabs. Despite their neutrality, Deir Yassin was attacked and 107 people were killed, of whom only 12 were fighters and 12 to 50 were injured. To this day, Israel refuses to release material documenting the massacre like images and intelligence reports on Deir Yassin, and they remain classified by Israel for whatever reason. In response, 4 days after the Deir Yassin massacre, on April 13, there was an attack on the medical convoy in Jerusalem, which ended in a massacre, killing 78 Jews, most of whom were medical staff. The Deir Yassin massacre sparked terror among Palestinians across the country, frightening them enough to flee their homes. After taking Deir Yassin, they took other major cities including Haifa and Jaffa and took over 200 villages and towns, and the villages were quote-unquote depopulated. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, ranging from 700,000 to 1 million, varying by source, were forced to flee into neighboring states as refugees. That makes it around 50% to 85% of Palestinians who were displaced. Plan D became the blueprint for carrying out the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians to make room for a Jewish state, however arguable and controversial to some. Crucially, at the same time, most Jews who supported Zionism, or sometimes who didn't, were persecuted in Arab countries, their property and belongings forcibly taken, and they were subjected to severe anti-Jewish riots, which were mostly encouraged by the governments. However, some argue that while Jews faced discrimination and political instability in some Arab countries, their migration wasn't only due to forced expulsion. Nonetheless, Jews in Arab countries fled to Israel, the US, and France. Some call this the Jewish Nakba. Some say Israel's 1 million plan was also the reason. Some Israelis say most refugees came due to Zionism and personal reasons, not persecution. However, persecution was done nonetheless, even though it's arguable and controversial to some. Ashrawi, if I'm pronouncing right, said that if Israel is their homeland, then they are not refugees. The Israeli government officially considers them as such, at least some of them, and supports their right to reclaim property left behind. However, they live as normal citizens, however, internationally aren't referred to as refugees. Still important to know the suffering of Jews along with the Palestinians, as suffering is suffering at the end of the day. In April 1948, the British left. And then on 14th May, Zionists declared the state as Israel, and the people without land got the land with the people. But keep in mind that the creation of Israel didn't end the unjust Nakba and Jewish suffering. Okay. A state has been made and is for the security of the Jewish people. However, as you will soon find out, the location will not turn out to be much safer, roughly speaking. The very next day, on May 15, neighboring Arab countries and Yemen and Saudi Arabia, some of which were overwhelmed by Palestinian refugees, went to war with Israel. Israel won, and now Israel has control over 78% of the land, and this strip, Gaza, is now controlled by Egypt, and this area, called the West Bank, is controlled by Jordan. In 1964, Palestinians came together and formed the PLO, and Fatah was formed in 1965 as a political party. Between 1948 and 1951, 260,000 Jews immigrated to Israel from Arab countries. And after some time in 1967, another war started in which Israel got the whole of Palestine and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt and the Golan Heights from Syria. And this was the height of Israel. 413,000 Palestinians were displaced in this war, which is called the Six-Day War. Goldman reported that Ben-Gurion, which is Israel's first prime minister, had told him in private in 1956 that why would the Arabs make peace? If I was an Arab leader, I would never make terms with Israel. That is natural. We have taken their country. Sure, God promised it to us, but what does that matter to them? Our God is not theirs. We come from Israel. It's true, but 2,000 years ago. And what is that to them? And after some time, on Yom Kippur Day, which is the holiest day in Judaism, another war in 1973 started, which Israel won. In the same year, Mujma'ul Islami was established in Gaza by Sheikh Ahmad Yassin. Remember them. The organization was peaceful at first and made mosques and clinics and provided treatment and food for the people. In 1978, the US brokered Israel and Egypt peace talks and they signed the Camp David Accords. Shortly after that, Israel gave Sinai back to Egypt as part of the treaty. It was highly controversial at the time and will become one of the reasons behind the Egyptian president's assassination. And from here, Arab countries started making peace with Israel, even if no peace treaties were signed. And this changed the Arab-Israeli conflict into a Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The PLO fought against Israel, including acts of terrorism on both sides. Fighting between Israel and the PLO went on for years and was the reason Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982, which led to unrest in the country and the rise of Hezbollah. But that's another story. Initially, the PLO claimed all of what had been British Palestine and the end of Israel entirely. The PLO later said,
just so there's no misunderstanding again, you no longer want to destroy Israel. Is that correct?
We said two-state solution. We know that when we had accepted 181. It is now their role. It is now the ball in their side. They have to reply. Are they actually accepting what we had declared or not? But when we are speaking about two states solutions, this means Arab-Palestinian states and Jewish states, according to the United Nations Resolution 181. Not only Jewish states. And for the Israelis, they have to go to hell. We are human beings. And we have the right to live as all other people are living all over the world. We are fed up to be rats.
it would accept dividing the land between Israel and Palestine, but the conflict continued. After the Six-Day War, Israel controlled the Palestinian territories. Along with the territories came Palestinians, which Israel has fought and resisted for years. So instead of annexing, it occupied the territories militarily. So Palestinians are basically second-class citizens or people, as they could not vote and only had some basic human rights. The reason I'm saying some, you will know why in a minute. One thing I forgot to mention, but I have to say that Arabs who lived within Israel and had citizenship were given almost all rights and security and can vote, but have problems, of course. At this time, Israelis were moving in and making colonies or settlements. These people are called settlers, and they made their homes in the West Bank and Gaza, which of course Palestinians neither wanted nor liked. And settlers are followed by soldiers to guard them. The housing for the settlers was often subsidized by the Israeli government. Internationally, the settlements are illegal. However, in the short term, they make the occupation much more painful. Long term, by dividing up the Palestinian land, it would make it very, very, very difficult for the Palestinians to ever have a state, which would be even more painful. In 1984, the Israeli military raided a mosque and found weapons. Sheikh Yassin and others were jailed for secretly stockpiling weapons, but they were released due to a prisoner exchange deal. To clarify,
has not been made yet. The Palestinians had enough and their rage exploded and they rose up for an intifada, which is the Arabic word for uprising. It started with boycotts but turned violent, where Palestinians of all ages would throw stones and sometimes Molotov cocktails at much better equipped Israeli soldiers. It went on for years and was successfully suppressed by Israel. Around 200 Israelis and around 2,000 Palestinians were killed. Around the same time, a group of Palestinians in Gaza who considered the PLO too secular and too compromise-minded created short for a violent extremist group dedicated to Israel's destruction. You can guess who made it. You have 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. It was made by Ahmad Yassin, the same guy who made this and from whom this new organization emerged. However, good news, in the 1990s, Palestinians and Israelis started getting serious about peace talks with each other. And they came to this agreement called the Oslo Accords, which established a Palestinian government authority and gave it power to govern some land in the West Bank and some authority over almost all of Gaza. Nonetheless, there were still settlements in all of these places. This was a big deal for this conflict, like both sides were talking to each other and coming to agreements. However, extremists from both sides used violence to disrupt peace. Some Israelis started holding rallies, calling their prime minister a traitor and for giving land to the Palestinians. Some of these rallies were led by Benjamin Netanyahu. You may know who this guy is. While Hamas was doing suicide bombing. But the peace talks continued, and shortly after signing the second part of this deal, an extremist assassinated the prime minister. Next year, Benjamin Netanyahu was elected the Prime Minister of Israel. And Netanyahu is a key figure in this story because his worldview embodies a way of thinking that has taken roots in Israel in recent years. His thinking is that the only way to give security to the Jewish people is by doing whatever is necessary to stop making a Palestinian state anywhere within these borders.
Do the Palestinians have a right to a separate state?
Well,
Mr. Jam has been talking about human rights.
I think that no, I don't think they do,
But now he has become the Prime Minister, so you can guess where the peace talks went. When he became Prime Minister, he spent his time sabotaging and violating the peace accord for which people previously had lost thousands of lives and had spent years building up, claiming that the occupation was the key to the security of the Jewish people. They have to do this. He's quite a politician, being able to do all of this due to security, and security. So under his war, settlers continue to move into the West Bank. Hear it in his own words in this leaked talk with a settler.
במיוחד היום עם אמריקה, אני יודע מה זה אמריקה. אמריקה זה דבר שאפשר להזיז אותו בקלות, להזיז לכיוון הנכון. לא יחמיר לו.
אם אנחנו עושים לזה משהו.
הסכמי אוסלו שהכנסת חתמה עליהם, שאלו אותי לפני הבחירות התקיים, כן, בתנאי כפוף להדדיות וצמצום הנסיבות. אבל איך אתה מצמצם את הנסיבות? אני אתן פירוש להסכם שיאפשר לי להפסיק את הדהירה הזאת לקווי 67. איך עשיתי?
After the failure of the Oslo Accords and against the Israeli occupation, the Palestinians rose up again for a second intifada, which was much more violent, sophisticated, and coordinated. Along with the suicide bombings, there were also rocket attacks by Hamas. The intifada was suppressed yet again. Around 1,000 Israelis and 3,000 Palestinians were killed in the conflict, the majority of whom were civilians. The second intifada really changes the conflict. Israelis become apathetic and much more skeptical.
believing that Palestinians will never, ever accept peace or that it's even worth trying. Peace talks didn't work. All they did was produce more violence. So maybe the only way is to go back to full-blown occupation and control every move of the Palestinians. The Netanyahu way of seeing the world was looking better, so the country builds walls and checkpoints to control the movement of the Palestinians. Now the Palestinians are feeling like negotiating didn't work, resistance didn't work, and they're stuck with no future. In 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza. More than 8,400 settlers left Gaza, which were illegal by the way. They turned their attention entirely to their historic homeland of Judea and Samaria, which is in the West Bank. So new settlers in the West Bank increased by 15,000. For the first time, Israel gave Gaza independence, but it is still tightly controlled. As per the Israeli human rights organization Risha, Gaza residents may not bring a crate of milk into the Gaza Strip without Israeli permission. A Gaza university cannot receive visits from a foreign lecturer unless Israel issues a visitor's permit. A Gaza mother cannot register her child in the Palestinian population registry without Israeli approval. It's a big code, okay? For template, it is Gaza insert someone cannot some action without Israeli permission. This was how much control the state of Israel had over Gaza for the protection of the Jewish people. Occupation without occupation. Sorry, more like control without control. Like it was technically free, but actually not, but kind of was. The next year, an election was held in the Palestinian territories. The winner of these elections was, surprise, surprise, Hamas. Fatah, that had lost the election, tried to forcibly hold on to power, and then there was a Fatah and Hamas conflict. And it results in this split between the two Palestinian governments, Hamas controlling Gaza and Fatah controlling the West Bank. Some days before the takeover of Gaza by Hamas, the head of Israeli military intelligence had a meeting with the US ambassador in Tel Aviv. Looking at this leaked document, you see that the Israeli official says that Israel would be happy if Hamas took over Gaza, because it would mean that Israel could now treat Gaza like a hostile country. Now they are not responsible for more than 1 million civilians, as they are not occupying Gaza. They can impose an even stricter blockade to control anything coming in and out of the Gaza Strip. But aside from this, there was another reason. The thing that has been tried for centuries by empires onto empires to destroy empires, which is divide and rule. The Palestinian government was now deeply divided, with Hamas ruling Gaza and the PLO ruling the West Bank. And most importantly, neither considered the other to be legitimate, which weakened their ability to make any kind of country. This division played right into the hands of Israeli ambitions. That's why the ultra-nationalist Israeli finance minister called Hamas an asset.
הרשות הפלסטינית היא נטל וחמאס הוא נכס.
A horrifically ironic statement, and soon they will realize how this asset will give them their returns.
We did something very, very simple. We did everything in order to make sure that Hamas will go on controlling Gaza, and Palestinian Authority will control the West Bank, so they will fight each other.
The very next year, Benjamin Netanyahu was elected again. His intentions were clear: dividing and slowly conquering the Palestinian lands and controlling and watching every move of Palestinians, which reassured the Israeli citizens who were worried that Hamas now controlled Gaza. And they were doing all of this in the name of good old security. And this created a vicious cycle. Hamas control and violence strengthens, which leads to the legitimization of Netanyahu's actions, which causes occupation and Israeli blockade, which causes legitimization of Hamas. In the eyes of the Palestinians, Hamas is the only one that are doing something against Israeli oppression, unlike the other parties in the West Bank, which include launching rockets
into Israel and causing violence, which makes difficulties for making a Palestinian state as they are divided. And that makes it was felt from both sides that the other did not want peace, but rather violence and destruction of the other. This was a dangerous scheme that Netanyahu was playing. Now listen to the former Israeli Prime Minister.
So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically.
Even before this, in the early 1980s, there was an Israeli military governor in Gaza, Yitzhak Zerev, who later told the New York Times reporter that he had helped finance the Palestinian Islamist movement as a counterweight to the PLO and the Fatah party, led by Yasser Arafat. Avner Cohen, a former Israeli religious affairs official who worked in Gaza for more than 2 decades, told the Wall Street Journal in 2009, Hamas, to my great regret, is Israel's creation. Back in the mid-1980s, Cohen even wrote an official report to his superiors warning them not to play divide and rule in the occupied territories by backing Palestinian Islamists against Palestinian secularists. I suggest focusing our efforts on finding ways to break up this monster before this reality jumps in our face, he wrote. They didn't listen to him. He recalls a 1970s meeting with the traditional Islamic cleric who wanted Israel to stop cooperating with the Muslim Brotherhood followers of Sheikh Yassin. He told me, "You are going to have big regrets in 20 or 30 years. He was right. Back to Netanyahu. Instead of trying to take Hamas out, Netanyahu overtly supported them. He let a huge transfer of cash in literal suitcases into the Gaza Strip that Hamas would eventually get their hands on. He released 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for 1 Israeli soldier.
So what we did, with the permission of our Prime Minister, is to let Qatar to transfer a huge amount of money in cash, probably more than $1.4 billion.
As long as Hamas is in power and is contained, settlements are being built on the West Bank, which shot up during his watch, and you can see the settlements and how they are spread and have carved the West Bank. If this continues, it will make it impossibly difficult to make a Palestinian state, and that's the point. In the eyes of Netanyahu, the plan is working. The settlements are going up and nobody is doing anything against them. I mean, anything significant. From time to time, some Palestinians resist and fight the Israeli soldiers, but it gets managed. And the international community can't do a thing either. I mean, there are some UN resolutions, but they get vetoed. Thanks to the US. The possibility of a Palestinian state becomes dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. Divide and conquer. Palestine was divided from within and without, and your people think it's working and they get what Israel was made for, the security of the Jews. Not so fast.
He fed the beast, and it exploded in our face.
On October 7th, Hamas and other militants attacked Israel. It began with the launching of more than 3,000 rockets and the invasion of Israel. Hamas militants attacked military bases and also civilian communities, also killing civilians of almost all ages, taking hostages, and setting fire to homes, which of course they deny. It was a massacre. Massacres. Some people and legal experts have called the attack a genocidal massacre against Jews or Israelis, while some have disputed this. The word genocide, which is quite common now, was first brought on Hamas in support of Israel. The day was labeled as the bloodiest in Israel's history and the deadliest for Jews since the Holocaust. This is Omar. He was very close to his sisters. They were always playing together, said a friend of the family. See this image? All the people you are seeing in the picture were killed. It was later found out that Omar's parents had been shot dead by the militants. Their 3 children, Omar along with his older sisters, were killed when their home was set on fire. And another family, the father, the grandmother, and their 10-month-old daughter, Mila, were killed. The mother was injured and managed to flee and survive along with the couple's 2 sons. Hiding in fear, Israelis texted their friends and family a very similar question: where is the army? It took several hours for the Israeli military to respond appropriately, awfully long. By the time it took for the Israeli military to respond, damage was already done. Many were killed. And they weren't the only one. The attack claimed lives of hundreds, and it was pure chaos. The attacks resulted in more than 1,100 deaths, a total of 837 civilians, including 695 Israeli civilians, which included 36 children like Omar and her sisters and Mila, 71 foreign nationals, 4 Gazans, and many more. And more than 13,000 people were injured. Approximately 250 Israeli civilians and soldiers were taken as hostages to the Gaza Strip, including 30 children. The stated goal was to force Israel to release all the Palestinian hostages, prisoners, in exchange for all the Israeli hostages. When Israelis were asking, where is the army, Israeli security and defense forces had in recent months been more focused on the West Bank rather than Gaza, potentially, certainly, leaving gaps. And they also obviously weren't expecting an attack of that scale. In 5 words, underestimation or a grave miscalculation. This was also a major failure for the military and intelligence agencies.
It became clear that that's the worst failure of our intelligence and operational forces since the establishment of the State of Israel.
Egypt warned Israel of attack, something unexpected or something big. A few days earlier, a senior US politician says, which Netanyahu denies as fake news. On October 9th, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant announced a total blockade of the Gaza Strip.
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
It also included not letting aid in. However, after some pressure, some aid is allowed to pass here and there, but after some time, it's blocked and then relieved, and so on and so forth, and repeat and repeat. On October 13th, Israel called for residents of northern Gaza to evacuate within 24 hours. And they also started airstrikes, bombing, and raids on a smaller scale. On October 28th, Israel officially began its invasion of Gaza. So what about the civilians? Firstly, Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world. On October 16th, Khan Yunis, a city of 400,000, was made into 1,000,000. On the same day, an Israeli minister said,
עזה חייבת להיות יותר קטנה בסוף המלחמה. א', זה עניין ביטחוני.
להרחיב את הפרימטר.
נכון, גם במזרח וגם בצפון. והם צריכים לאבד את השטח הזה. אחד, זה ביטחונית. שתיים, מחיר הפסד שהערבים מבינים.
while to add that Israeli forces bombed the Rafah border crossing on the same day. And this wasn't the first time, as they have done the same on October 11th. It took more than 1 month and 15 days, and by December 1st, 80% of the territory's population was in the southern Gaza Strip. The rest remained. So now the overpopulated south has made more overpopulated. Evacuees described the evacuation corridors as unsafe and full of terror from Israeli soldiers and dead bodies along the road. A lot of people were killed in the south, and one was the soul of my soul. You may have heard of her. It was done when the south was said to be a safe zone. But after some fighting, there was a temporary ceasefire and also prisoner exchange deal. Israel released 240 Palestinian prisoners, 107 of whom were between 14 and 17 years old, and 3/4 of whom had not been convicted of a crime, although some were awaiting a trial in a military court. In exchange, Hamas released 105 civilians, which included 81 people from Israel, 23 Thais, and 1 Filipino. Nonetheless, if talking about all hostages, as of now, 116 were released or rescued, 58 were killed, 19 bodies were recovered, and 70 people were killed by Israeli airstrikes, at least according to Hamas. 77 living captives and hostages and 43 dead bodies are still held. 4 people were held prior to October 7th. These are collected from different sources and may change in the future. This is the Bibas family. Mother, father, and their children. A 9-month-old and a 4-year-old. The parents were killed and the kids were taken as hostages, with the 9-month-old soul being the youngest hostage still held. Now moving to another family, this is the mother, father, and a 3-year-old daughter. They were abducted while the father's mother was killed and his sister was captured as well. They were saved by the Israeli forces, with the mother unfortunately being recaptured. But she was saved and rejoined her family as part of the temporary ceasefire. Look at them reuniting.
Yes.
On October 7th, there was a music festival happening on one of the holiest days of Judaism. The militants attacked, and the festival changed into the biggest Israeli civilian massacre. More than 350 people were killed, the majority of whom were civilians, and approximately 40 people were taken as hostages. Noa Argamani was one of them. She was held hostage for several months, but thankfully she was rescued by the Israeli forces in an operation that saved 4 hostages. In addition to that, at least according to Hamas and Hamas-run health ministry, 3 hostages were killed, of which 1 US citizen was killed, a claim rejected by Israel. The operation killed many people. 276 Palestinians were killed, the majority of whom were children and women, and more than 600 were injured. It was disputed by Israel, of course. However, Israel itself said that hundreds of civilians were killed. Now let's talk about Palestinian hostages. Prisoners. Even if we start on October 7, 3,000 Palestinians were arrested. Out of 3,000, more than 10% are children, and 1,200 have been placed in administrative detention, which allows anyone to be arrested without having done anything. Literally. This is old news. There are now more than 9,000 prisoners detained, one of whom is Basim Tamimi, who was put into administrative detention by Israel without charge or trial. He was released after about 8 months, similar to the case of Noah Gamani, just different actors. And both were roughly freed at the same time. Nonetheless, after the ceasefire, the war continued. The fighting continued. These are all the divisions of Gaza with these names. Firstly, they said to move beyond these lines, and most did, moving to Rafah and Khan Yunis, and this Khan Yunis refugee camp, which in fact is the biggest refugee camp in southern Gaza. But then the military moved to Khan Yunis, and Gazans had to, and so they moved to Rafah. Now they are planning to invade Rafah. Rafah as a division has a population of 267,000, and this city, also Rafah, has a population of 171,000, which was increased to 1.4 million. To restate, that Gaza as a whole has a population of 2.3 million. As you may have noticed, for the Palestinians, there is nothing beyond Rafah. You may say Egypt, but you would be so wrong. The only way to even move to Egypt is through Rafah crossing, which is now controlled by Israel. But even when it was controlled by Egypt, it was still difficult. Israel has bombed Rafah crossing 4 consecutive times, and Egypt blamed this reason for keeping it closed. However, it's said aid is allowed to pass. Aside from aid, some foreign nationals or foreign citizens, a selected few, are able to flee. For normal citizens, they had to pay ridiculous amounts of money to flee Gaza. A few months ago, if I remember correctly, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2728 was adopted on March 25, 2004, thanks to the US abstaining, which called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Benny Gantz, a member of the Israeli War Cabinet without portfolio, said it best with no flavoring, stating that the resolution had no operational significance. Anyway, back to Rafah. The majority of the population of Gaza was now in Rafah. Hence, most countries warned Israel not to invade Rafah. Despite these warnings from top allies, Israel still invaded Rafah. A few days earlier, before the Rafah offensive, Egypt and Qatar put forward a 3-stage ceasefire proposal. Israel rejected the proposal, but said it would engage in further talks to secure an agreement. The invasion continued for half a month, and then on May 24, the International Court of Justice ordered an immediate halt to the offensive. So Israel, after this, continued the offensive. They didn't listen to neither the ICC nor the UN and continued the offensive. Even the US warned Israel that it would stop sending weapons if they invaded Rafah. But when they did invade Rafah, nothing changed. On May 26, Hamas fired a barrage of rockets towards central Israel for the first time in months. The war is going on, at least for now, and it won't end anytime soon. An Israeli official says it will take 7 months for the war to end. As of making this video, the war has gone on for about roughly 8 months. Just after the start of the war, an internal leaked US State Department email advised senior diplomats to avoid three phrases in their public statements: de-escalation, ceasefire, end to violence, bloodshed, and restoring calm. The same day, Israel gave Gazans 24 hours to flee from north to south, which some called outrageous, and the UN said impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. Nonetheless, Gazans began fleeing to the south, while Hamas told them to remain in place. After the start of the Rafah invasion on May 11th, the Israeli military ordered more residents to evacuate eastern and central Rafah. By May 15, an estimated 600,000 had fled Rafah and another 100,000 from the north, according to the UN. The war has caused the largest displacement of Palestinians in 75 years. Some call it Second Nakba or Gaza Nakba. Israel sure gave some places that they call safe zones, but they weren't that safe. Firstly, these safe zone locations changed quite a lot from north to south, from Khan Yunis to Rafah, and vice versa. And most importantly, the safe zone nobody talks about is from Gaza to heaven. Most Palestinians fled with their families from one place to another by foot or donkey carts, and some by car. Whether they fled or not, it won't matter, as you will soon find out why. Israel bombed safe areas like areas of Khan Yunis of southern Gaza, killing dozens. And a strike on a school in the afternoon in the Al-Maghazi refugee camp. And this wasn't the last time. Israel bombed the Tel al-Sultan displacement camp in Rafah. This was an area designated by Israel as a safe zone. The strike killed at least 45 people, where they said the strike hit a militant compound and killed 2 senior Hamas officials. Israel says 6,000 bombs weighing 4,000 tons were dropped on Gaza in just 6 days, which is higher than how much the US bombed Afghanistan in a year. Afghanistan is 1,800 times bigger than Gaza. Also, not to forget, it is one of the most densely populated places in the world. That is only in the first 6 days of the response. Now it's more than 70,000 tons. Some compare the destruction to the destruction brought by the US in Vietnam. Israel has even used white phosphorus during the war multiple times. You may say, what's white phosphorus and why I'm saying it the way I am? White phosphorus is dangerous, to say the least. However, it's not banned and can be legally used to make smoke screens, create illumination, mark targets, or burn bunkers and buildings. But that's it. It's extremely harmful to humans in all cases of contact. It ignites instantly upon contact with oxygen, causing deep and severe burns, penetrating even through bone. And even after treatment, it can reignite again. Now I'm going to show an image that will show the effect on a body. As you have seen, this is the damage caused by the white phosphorus. Not coincidentally, Israel has previously used it in the Lebanon-Israel war and also in the 2008 and 2009 Gaza war. And the image I showed you was from this war. Israel denied it, of course. However, Human Rights Watch said it verified videos taken in Lebanon on October 10th and Gaza on October 11th showing multiple airbursts of artillery-fired white phosphorus over the Gaza city port and 2 rural locations along the Israel-Lebanon border. The use of such weapons puts civilians at risk of serious and long-term injury. In 2013, Israel's military said now moving to normal bombs. By mid-December, Israel has dropped 20,000 munitions on Gaza, destroying or damaging 70% of homes. At least hundreds of cultural landmarks and dozens of cemeteries were destroyed. To flee Gaza, citizens had to pay ridiculous amounts of money to the Egyptian authorities, like $2,000, $4,000, $8,000 or $10,000 per person. The price changed depending on the person and age, and even for children it was about $2,500. Utterly ridiculous. Due to the war, 200,000 to 500,000 Israelis have been displaced, while nearly all of the Strip's 2.3 million Palestinian population has been displaced as well. Keep in mind, most were refugees. It was widely reported that there is no safe place in Gaza. Along with this, there's a tight blockade on Gaza, as I've told you before. It includes blocking the entry of food, water, medicine, fuel, and electricity. Israel has said that the blockade would not be lifted until the release of hostages. Due to the blockade, 97% of the 2.1 million don't have enough food, while 83% are surviving through extreme measures. I'll say it again, this is old news. Now it includes 99% or almost 100%. And the situation changed from bad to worse, to the worst, such that there might be a famine to there will be a famine to there is a famine. More than 600,000 people are starving to death, while some have already faced it. There's a reason it has been called hell on earth. Due to the conditions, the people are fully dependent on it, and due to frequent disruptions, it affects people a lot. And it's quite difficult to feed more than 2 million people, isn't it? So obviously, only some are able to get aid. Most people survive through extreme measures, like eating left behind unclean food or anything that they can eat, like animal feed, weeds and plants, and even boiling grass, etc. Just see for yourself. A third of Gaza's tree cover and farmland are either destroyed or damaged due to the war. So growing food is also out of the question for most, if not all, due to displacement. Nermeen Tafish and her 5 children scour the stalls every day for something affordable to eat. But almost everything is unaffordable for almost everyone, as about 50% of the population is unemployed. And that's before the war. Now it's worse, and even if they are employed, it's still very difficult. The food is very expensive due to its low supply and large demand. Most of her family members were in the south, and her husband was away for work. She heard stories of people being killed while trying to evacuate south, so she decided to stay. She is shocked that 2 pounds of rotten-looking potatoes now sell for 40 shekels, more than $10. 2 pounds of rice, which cost less than $2 before the war, now sell for $20. She and her kids leave empty-handed once again. She prepares her family's only meal of the day with the 5 children in their destroyed home. This is their only meal of the day. Her oldest son, Yusuf, helps by searching for wood to make a fire since Israel has cut off fuel and electricity. Just like them, there are many untold stories and people. Like you can see this family eating grass, with some mixing it with lemon. One said, we lie to our children and tell them it's mulukhia. It's mulukhia. And a mother selling her kidney to feed her children. A teenage girl who suffers from anemia said it best, if the bombs don't kill us, the hunger will. Although the water problem is nothing new and was a major problem before, it got a lot worse after October 7th. 3 major desalination plants have been offline since shortly after the start of the current conflict. They either were destroyed by the Israeli bombardment or are without the fuel necessary to run them. The large desalination plant that was still in operation was only working at 5% capacity in late October. Now, before I continue, please have a glass of water. You can pause if you want. Many of the dozens of small privately owned desalination facilities have also been unable to operate due to lack of fuel to run generators. All wastewater plants are also shut down due to lack of power, resulting in raw sewage, flooding the streets. Now that you have finished your glass of water, how was it? Whether you got it from a tap or the refrigerator, cold or warm, it was clean and refreshing. People in Gaza are using seawater to clean clothes and for other purposes. However, an alarming thing is that people are drinking salty seawater or unclean and unsafe water as there is no other choice. The aid is certainly helping, but it is not enough. Hence, the majority of the populace drinks unclean water nonetheless. The UN's Children's Agency warns that in conflict areas, children under 5 are 20 times more likely to die of diseases linked to diarrhea than to violence. 20 times. Since mid-October, more than 30,000 cases of diarrhea have been reported, according to the World Health Organization, as quoted by the Wall Street Journal. Over half of those are children under 5 years old. And I forgot to add, that's all news. Just talking about children under 5 years of age, cases of diarrhea rose from 48,000 to 71,000 in just 1 week, starting on December 17th. What Gaza really needs, according to humanitarian organizations, is fuel to restore power. In the meantime, solar panels are being used in Gaza to power wells to pump water, creating clean water. But as with everything, it's very expensive and not nearly enough.
سيرياج يجعني بطني يجعني بكتير بيجين امراض من هذه الاشياء وماما عيت وكل اخواتي عيوا من المي الملوثه.
Most energy needs are met through solar energy. Mobile phones, as you can see, are quite a lot, and they are also charged through solar energy. However, patience is required. Aside from solar energy, there is an energy crisis. The problem is nothing new, but as with all things, it got a lot worse. This is quite tragic for normal citizens, but it's most tragic for hospitals, which do not have the energy to meet their demands to even treat basic diseases. I will discuss the tragedies of the hospitals in detail later. One thing you may have noticed is that most, or at least some of the footage you get is not from journalists, but rather from normal people living in Gaza. They get their phones charged through solar energy, but the question is, how do they get the internet if due to fuel shortages and other reasons, internet and telephone services are down? The answer is that they get the internet through a SIM, specifically an eSIM. eSIMs are virtual SIM cards that allow people to connect to the outside world, communicate with their families, show what's happening in Gaza, or get an education. Over 300,000 eSIMs have been donated. And this is a great development, as if it weren't for the people who donated eSIMs, no one would know. Street journalism is a major part for knowing the situation. Since the war, only a handful of foreign journalists have been selected, and they too are controlled and were subjected to strict restrictions. With few exceptions, no journalists have been allowed to leave Gaza since October 7th. Aside from the foreign journalism and street journalism, there are Palestinian journalists who have risked their lives to document the livelihood of the Palestinians and the fighting. Like Motaz, the most famous, who was initially a photographer, but after October 7th, the limited coverage and restrictions led him to becoming a key reporter of the situation. And he is not the only one. There are many, many, many more. Like you got the point I'm trying to make. They are documenting the war and everything happening in Gaza as much as they can. If you remember, after October 7, the number of detainees kept rising. Some of these were Palestinian journalists. On May 29, there were 76 journalists detained, 50 of whom were jailed and 20 were put in administrative detention. Now they are about 80. And I predict they will keep on rising. Journalists are not only arrested but also killed. At least 109 journalists and media workers are killed in Gaza. They are either killed due to the bombing or Israeli airstrikes. About 100 were killed. Hence why Israel has been accused of censorship. The ICC had issued arrest warrants for Hamas and Israeli officials, which include these people. This was of course condemned by both Hamas and Israel. Some 12 senators sent a letter to the ICC and said, and I quote, "Target Israel and we will target you." The senators tell Khan, who is the ICC prosecutor, adding that they will sanction your employees and associates and bar you and your families from the United States. And now, after the arrest warrants have been issued, some in the US are trying to sanction the ICC. An investigation by The Guardian and the Israeli-based magazines can reveal how Israel has run an almost decade-long secret war against the court. ICC lacks jurisdiction but still shows it has some significance after all. Netanyahu has taken a close interest in the intelligence operations against the ICC and was described by one intelligence source as being obsessed. They surveil, hack, pressure, smear, and allegedly threaten senior ICC staff in an effort to derail the court's inquiries long before October 7th. Now let's talk about the place where the injured, the sick, and the dead go. And that's hospital. There are about 32 hospitals in Gaza. Due to the lack of fuel and other essentials, only 3 hospitals are barely running. And by barely, I mean barely. One is Al-Ahli Hospital, which is, fun fact, in not so fun times, one of the oldest hospitals founded in 1882, and the only Christian hospital in Gaza. It was attacked twice, once by Israel and the other by, most likely, a misfired Palestinian rocket. One hospital that you may have heard of is Al-Shifa Hospital. It was the largest medical complex and central hospital in the Gaza Strip. Sadly, I was saying was because it has also been destroyed due to the Israeli attack on the hospital. But why, you may ask? Israel said that there was a Hamas command and control center beneath the hospital. In the lead-up to November 15, 2023, raid on the hospital, the Israeli government called for the evacuation of the building. This evacuation, considered a death sentence by the World Health Organization, was rejected by medical staff who were unwilling to leave patients behind. On the day of the raid, the hospital housed 22 intensive care patients, 36 premature babies, and more than 2,000 displaced people, according to the medical staff. Israel said they found weapons, a claim rejected by Hamas. BBC News and CNN conducted video analysis concluding the Israeli army apparently rearranged or added weapons for the media tour. The BBC News also reported that an Israeli video with alleged discoveries had been edited.
I want to show you a room where we found all the gear, the operational gear of Hamas. I want you to understand, this kind of gear is a gear for a major fight. I want you to look at this room. People are putting curtains with nothing above, just wall. No reason to put here a curtain unless you want to film hostages and deliver. There is a list. This list, in Arabic, this list says we are in an operation. The operation against Israel started in the 7th of October.
They weren't shifts of people, but rather a calendar. And they also used curtains and alleged weapons, as you can see in the video, and did not let that lead to an independent investigation. NBC News said that Israel released several pieces of inaccurate or disputed information, which weakened Israel's credibility, and it could lead to a boy who cried wolf situation. And to some extent, that has already happened. After the siege and bombing and operation and everything, photos and survivors' testimony gathered by NPR in Gaza City reveal a battle that destroyed nearly every corner of Al-Shifa, as well as the neighborhoods and homes around it. Now, heaps of twisted metal, debris, and ashes from fires that were set alight. Bodies lay decomposing in the hospital's dirt courtyard, which was laden with unexploded ordnance. Other people were shot and left to die in its hallways, maimed and crushed by tanks outside its gates, decomposing on side streets and in buildings. Israel says more than 200 militants have been killed and more than 500 have been captured. According to the Gaza ministry, 400 Palestinians were killed and 21 patients were killed, as per the WHO. 409 bodies were recovered. And the Hamas Command Center as I said, only a few hospitals are operating, as they are overcrowded by the injured, sick, and dead. Doctors have little to no supplies, so they are choosing patients based on who's more likely to survive, literally choosing which person to save, as there is an ample supply of the injured and the sick. One doctor confirmed that operations were going ahead without anesthesia. The injured during and after treatment cry and moan in pain as there is no anesthesia, no painkiller, and no antibiotic. So they cry and scream for hours. They don't have enough beds either. A doctor said, even if there is somebody with cardiac arrest or cardiac problems, we put them on the floor and start to work on them. Ahu team said they recently met a 7-year-old girl at the European Gaza hospital who was suffering from 75% burns, but was unable to receive pain relief because of short supplies. Our doctor said there are a lot of people who are severely burnt. We don't have any suitable painkillers for them. We had no running water, so we had no ability to scrub up and wash. We just had to use alcohol gel before operating. There were no drapes to cover the patients, so we had to use makeshift gowns to try to keep the patients clean. There's no electricity, so they are doing operations using headlights. Some patients' wounds are rotting as they've been open for a long time. They can't even get basic treatment in some situations due to the low supply. They are sicknesses and we cannot find any cure, said 54-year-old Abu Khalid, who has been displaced to Rafah in southern Gaza. You need to go out from dawn and get in a queue and maybe you will find 100 people in front of you. You go back empty-handed. I can't get out of my mind. A child came in alive, literally burnt to the bone. Their hands were contracting, their face was just charcoal, and they were alive and talking. And we had no morphine, she said. I won't be able to wipe that memory and the smell being treated on the floor. Now think of cancer and terminal patients. The suffering reminds me of a line from a song that goes, "Here death comes cheaper than life." And I couldn't find better words, but then again, the dead aren't better either. Some bodies are not even buried, but are on the streets, under buildings, in rubble, etc. And the bodies themselves become dangerous in a way. You can say they have no time to mourn, as people are happy when they do find a place to bury the dead. The public decomposition of dead bodies for a long period of time leads to the transmission of serious diseases, including blood-borne viruses. Gastrointestinal infections like cholera can also be easily spread through direct contact with dead bodies, leaking excrement, soiled clothing, or contaminated tools or vehicles. Certain animals, including birds, rodents, and insects, can feed on dead bodies and spread diseases, like malaria causing mosquitoes. Now, to put salt on the wound, mass graves were found. Actually, some bodies were dug by Palestinians, as people were not able to access cemeteries at the time, and the dead were buried in the hospital yard. And the group said that some of the casualties were from the siege and others were from the raid. Many bodies showed signs of severe trauma, including being crushed or disfigured partially as a result of being run over by Israeli tanks. Graves and even people alive being run over by Israeli tanks. The Israeli military issued a statement denying it had buried any bodies on the hospital's grounds. However, it said its troops inspected remains buried at the facility to ensure that hostages taken captive into Gaza were not among the dead. It said that remains were returned to their place after they were examined. In a statement, the director of Gaza Emergency Operations Center said the bodies we found were on beds at the reception and emergency department, meaning Israel destroyed the department over the heads of sick and injured people, and they were buried alive. Some bodies of children were found with no heads. A mass grave has been discovered on the grounds of a school. The bodies of 30 Palestinians were reportedly found in body bags, blindfolded, and their hands tied behind their backs. It was indicated that the victims were under detention, suggesting they were executed in the field. These are the situations faced by the Palestinians, including the Christian community, who are largely unheard or unthought of. They are a minority in Gaza, representing less than 1% of the population, and are at least for now about 1,000 to 1,400. There are only 3 churches in Gaza, 2 of which are working, which are Holy Family Church and Church of the Saint. As you know, during the displacement of the north, not all fled, some remained. The majority of the Palestinian Christians took refuge in the church. It was reported that around 650 Palestinian Christians have used the Holy Family Church as a refuge since the start of the war, while the figure of the Catholic daily is around 700 Palestinian Christians. The church was attacked too, and shrapnel from Israeli airstrikes destroyed solar panels, water tanks, and other buildings in the parish complex. Nahida and her daughter were shot when going to the bathroom. One was killed while trying to carry the other. They weren't the only one. 7 more people were shot and wounded. The other church, the Church of the Saint, was also hit by an airstrike by the Israeli Air Force, which hit 2 halls sheltering Gazan Palestinian Muslims and Christians, causing the collapse of at least one building and killing between 16 and 18 civilians. They are not immune to the suffering that the majority faces. Alas, no one is. Not even these forgotten faces. Now, from troubled souls or forgotten faces, we come to voiceless hearts in troubled places, the fauna. A person explained, due to the lack of sufficient food in the Jabalia refugee camp and the entire northern region, both people and animals have been starving, leading to the death of these animals over the past few weeks. Another Gaza City resident told that a cat roamed around a nearby garbage container, stating that the hungry animal was trying to satisfy its hunger by eating the corpse of its own kind, due to the inability to find food. Dogs and cats are eating the corpses of humans and even their own kind. A person expressed concern about the widespread starvation among both people and animals, saying people are on the brink of starving to death. Now, think about the animals. Videos on social media also showed starving cats and dogs feeding on the corpses of Palestinians in Khan Yunis, where the Israeli army hindered ambulance access. A Palestinian veterinarian built a shelter for abandoned cats in southern Gaza's Rafah, stating that many cats have died either due to Israeli attacks or hunger. The war Israel unleashed on Gaza killed not only people but also animals. Animals have also been affected by this great injustice, expressing that he distributes cat food obtained with great difficulties to the cats gathered in the shelter, despite the high prices of cat food. He will make every effort to ensure that the animals he protects do not die. He protects the cats to return them to their owners after the war. Due to the war, there have been escalations in the West Bank and Lebanon. Specifically in the West Bank, after the start of the war, everything horrible increased by a significant amount. Raids, airstrikes, settler violence, you just name it. Israel also increased the control of the Palestinian movement. More than 600 people have been killed, while the injured are more than 5,000. 14-year-old Basil Abul Wafa was shot multiple times, sustaining mortal wounds, while 8-year-old Adam al-Ghul was killed with a shot to the head. One boy, 13 years old, was shot when he fired a firework at the sky. He was taken by an Israeli ambulance and later pronounced dead. Israel said they would bury the child on the opposite side of the Israeli West Bank barrier from his family, killing a literal child for fireworks. Following the child's death, Itamar Ben-Gvir stated that he saluted the troops who had killed. On January 19th, a 17-year-old Palestinian-American teenager was killed by Israeli soldiers. He was the 94th kid and the first American killed in the West Bank since the start of the war. At least for now, 132 children have been killed. They raided multiple places and also destroyed infrastructure in some places where they raided. For example, Jenin infrastructure was destroyed. A Jenin mosque was raided and the Israeli soldiers made a mocking call to prayer. They sang and did Jewish prayers in the style of Islamic call to prayer. Later, Israel said they would be disciplined. Forgetting the military, the United Nations recorded more than 800 Israeli settler attacks on Palestinians from October 7th until May 2024. Palestinian police are forbidden from reacting to acts of violence by Israeli settlers or soldiers. But what's not surprising is that not a single one has been charged. I'm not exaggerating, settlers can do almost anything as long as it doesn't harm Israel. Violence generally for the Palestinians in the West Bank has increased significantly, but is largely forgotten due to the war in Gaza. On December 15th, Doctors Without Borders reported that 2023 was the deadliest hit Palestinians in the West Bank in recorded history. Aside from this, Israel has approved plans for nearly 3,500 new settlements in the West Bank. I'm running out of time, so I just gave you a short version, a short snapshot of the situation in the West Bank. Due to the war, a lot of people have been killed in Gaza. More than 40,000 people have been killed, of which more than 28,000 have been identified. More than 11,000 men have been killed, and about 5,000 to 11,000 women share the same fate. The UN says that 2 mothers are killed each hour. More than 2,400 elderly people have also been killed. Not even the UN nor paramedics and medical staff are safe. There have been reports of aid workers being attacked and killed, which according to the International Crisis Group has made Gaza the deadliest place for aid workers. The most notable report was the attack on World Central Kitchen. The team was traveling in a deconflicted zone, safe zone, into armored cars branded with the logo and a soft skin vehicle. Despite coordinating movements with the Israeli forces, the convoy was hit as it was leaving the Deir al-Balah warehouse, where the team had unloaded more than 100 tons of humanitarian food aid brought to Gaza on the maritime route. The attack killed 7 people. The 7 killed were from Australia, Poland, the United Kingdom, are dual citizens of the US and Canada, and Palestine. According to the Associate Crisis, Conflict and Arms Director at Human Rights Watch, Israel's killing of 7 aid workers was shocking and should never have happened under international law. Israel's allies need to recognize that these attacks that have killed aid workers have happened over and over again, and they need to stop. Israel's attack on April 1st on the convoy was far from being an isolated mistake, and is just one of at least 8 incidents that Human Rights Watch identified, in which aid organizations and UN agencies had communicated with Israeli authorities the GPS coordinates of an aid convoy or premises, and yet Israeli forces attacked the convoy or shelter without any warning. Due to this, many humanitarian organizations have left Gaza. In total, about 500 to more than 900 paramedics and medical staff have been killed, and more than 150 UN staff have also been killed. Look at this kiddo. His name is also Umar, but he is a Palestinian. He was playing with his brother and then he was killed by an Israeli airstrike, while his brother was wounded. In the footage, his leg is bandaged and he looks shocked. The candle of my life is how his mother described him.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. معكم عوني وفيديو جديد. اوكي يا اخوان، الفيديو هذا فيديو تعريفي، هذا كان لازم انزله من زمان بس نزل اليوم. حينزل اليوم الخميس 18/8/2022. اوكي يا اخوان، تعريف عني، انا عوني الدوس، فلسطيني من غزة، العمر 12 سنة. هذا هدف القناة طبعا نصل 100,000 مشترك و500,000 ومليون، وبإذن الله لل10 مليون، وبدعمكم وبمحبتكم. اوكي طبعا شكرا على 1000 مشترك وبيس صار.
On October 7th, that night, the top of the building was hit by 2 Israeli bombs, destroying it. The 3-story building housed 3 generations of their families, with each branch housed on different floors. He lived on a floor with his mother, father, 2 older sisters, and 2 younger brothers, all of whom were killed in the bombing. 15 people were killed in total, 7 of whom being children. Now he has more than 1 million subscribers, but he is no more. Hind Rajab was a 6-year-old Palestinian girl who was fleeing from a neighborhood in Gaza City with her 6 relatives, an uncle, aunt, and 4 cousins. Then an Israeli army tank shot at their vehicle, killing her uncle, aunt, and 4 cousins, one of which was still alive, a 15-year-old cousin, called the Palestinian Red Crescent Society for emergency aid, crying and screaming that Israeli forces were shooting at them amid the sound of gunfire before going silent. Rajab was then the sole survivor in the car, surrounded by the dead bodies of her family. Then she was on a 3-hour phone call with the Crescent Society.
ميتين؟ وهم هلا معك بالسيارة؟ انت هلا وين متخبية هلا؟ وين انت هلا محمية؟ بالسيارة. جوا السيارة انت صح؟ مش برا السيارة. صح. طيب خليكي يا عمري بالسيارة، أنا رح أتمني فاتح الخط معاكي، أتمني أحكي معك، ما بدي أسكر التليفون، تمام؟ الدبابة جنبية. الدبابة وين؟ جنبية. الدبابة جنبكم؟ ما عم تتحرك ولا واقف؟ نزل حدا منها؟ لا بتتحرك. تتحرك؟ طيب هي بتتحرك جنب السيارة ولا هي جاية من ورا السيارة أو من قدام السيارة؟ من قدام السيارة. هي جاية عليكي من قدام السيارة الدبابة؟ قريب كتير؟ كتير. وعم تمشي؟ طيب ما بدنا نخاف. نحكي معك. أنا معك يا عمري. أنا معك. أنا معك ليجي حدا ياخدك، ما بدي أسيبك لحالك. لما يجي حدا بتفصل إيه؟ لما يجي حدا يكون بتفصلي. لا أنا بدي أتمني معاكي لأطمن إنه حدا هلال أو حدا جاي ياخدك. بديش أفصل حتى أنت إذا أجا لا سمح الله الجيش ما تفصلي، خلي الخط مفتوح، ما بدنا نفصل، أنا معاكي. إيش يا عمري؟ خليكي معي يا حبيبتي يا عمري، والله معك، هيني أنا مش تاركك، بحكي معاكي، ما بدي أصلا أتركك. أكثر من ساعة. إيه؟ أكثر من ساعة، أنا بكون موجودة حتى الليلة. إيش؟ حتى الليلة فقط. حبيبتي والله لو بإيدي لأجيكي نحكي يا الله. يا الله يا رب تحمينا. يا رب تحمينا.
However, she was eventually killed by Israeli forces. The total number of rounds fired at the car was about 335. According to an initial investigation from the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor, Rajab and her relatives were killed by the Israeli army in a planned execution using a US-made missile. They also killed the Red Crescent paramedics sent to rescue the young girl. The ambulance was sent to rescue Rajab, which was attacked by Israeli forces, killing 2 paramedics. In a deliberate attack, according to the organization, and despite the fact that Israel was notified of its dispatch. A 92-year-old Palestinian woman who suffered from Alzheimer's was found as a pile of charred bones on her granddaughter's burnt bed, according to her daughter. This is the room where her bones were found. A 7-year-old girl and her family were taking refuge when they were attacked and they were killed. She was found dead and her body was torn and hanging, as you can perhaps see. Her grandma was fleeing with her grandson holding a white flag. The grandmother was shot and killed by Israeli soldiers. However, the report and footage was disputed by some. Our home was brought down by what Khalid, our grandfather, said to be an Israeli airstrike. He said, adding that they were trapped under the rubble, while his son and daughter were injured. 3-year-old Reem and a 5-year-old brother, Tariq, had been killed. as he embraced the lifeless body of Reem, calling her soul of my soul.
تعود الله يا حاج تعود الله تفضل يا عم تعود الله حبيبي تفضل مش مشكله بسم الله انا لله الله يعوض امين الله يرحمه اعطونا فرصه شويه يا عم دقيقه شويه دقيقه اشتغلوا دوم في حالات خاصه لا اله الا الله روح الروح هذه روح الروح لا حول ولا قوه هذه روح الروح الله روح وين طارق
A Palestinian father returned with a birth certificate to find that the newborn twins were killed along with his wife and mother by an Israeli airstrike. There are many more untold stories like this. This is a photo of a Palestinian father crying while holding the dead body of his daughter. I have barely told you about 10 children, while more than 9,000 to 16,000 children have been killed, which according to the UN is higher than from 4 years of world conflict. If talking about the injured, more than 92,000 have been injured. Additionally, 8,000 children have required medical treatment for acute malnutrition. At least 37 deaths were confirmed due to malnutrition only, and deaths were also confirmed due to dehydration. And these are just the confirmed ones. Among the injured are 3,000 children with amputated limbs. Hence, Gaza has the largest population of child amputees in the world. More than 10 children are losing a leg or a limb every day. Quite tragic enough, but the tragedy doesn't end there. If you remember, many amputations and injuries are treated without anesthesia. About or even more than 10,000 are buried under the rubble. And about 6,000 to more than 20,000 people are missing. The figure of the people killed are only the ones who were killed directly. Indirectly killed are a lot more. The Lancet said the conservative figure of the total death toll would be more than 186,000. And this is just talking about Gaza in 8 months. And the war will continue for a while. Netanyahu himself would like to continue the war, as the public is not exactly fond of him. A poll found out that 4 out of 5 Jewish Israelis believe the government and Prime Minister Netanyahu are to blame for the attacks. More than half say he should resign when the war is over, while 52% also expect the defense minister to resign as well. However, the majority of Israelis initially and almost until recently supported the war, partially due to it being the first time that they faced such horror since the Holocaust or the creation of Israel. Still, their confidence in Netanyahu is declining, and they blame him for the attack, some due to his inability to reach a hostage deal or agree to some kind of ceasefire that may be affected by his desire to stay in power. Netanyahu is facing ICC arrest warrants internationally and corruption and related charges nationally. Netanyahu is also trying to appease the people and some of his radical party members, due to which he is currently in power, who want the war to continue. Even though now 47% of those who have been asked support an end to the war in Gaza in return for the release of the Israeli hostages, and only 32% are against it. His party is heavily against it. The majority of those who want a ceasefire or hostage proposal are the hostages' relatives, and they have played an important role in shifting the opinion of Israeli society. Israeli society is divided into 2 groups. Both want the return of hostages, however, one's approach is the one that's going on, while the other is a ceasefire. Aside from him currently being on trial, his cabinet members also include criminals and extremists. Out of these, two are of special concern: Smotrich, the Minister of Finance, and Itmar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security. Aside from both being illegal settlers, Itmar Ben-Gvir is said to be the go-to man for Jewish extremists facing legal trouble, while Smotrich denies the very existence of the Palestinian people. He was advocating for making settlements in Gaza again, and he was partially the reason for the approval of a record number of new settlements in the West Bank. While Ben-Gvir has said, "We want to occupy Gaza and stay there," they are accused of driving Netanyahu's Gaza policy. Aside from this, Israel has been accused of genocide against the Palestinian people. And among other things like evidence, the ICG, etc., the officials certainly helped the sentiment made. There are also exchanges of fire and skirmishes on the Lebanon-Israel border, and also with Iran. The tension is growing rapidly between Israel and both Iran and Hezbollah, as Israel has assassinated the top Hamas official in the Iranian capital, and also killed top Iranian military officials and Hezbollah officials. It may escalate to a war, not any war, but a regional war. But that's the second worst case scenario. But at the very least, Iran and Hezbollah will respond. Now we will see what Israel, Iran and Hezbollah will do. But as things stand, Netanyahu will not make this much better, and the suffering will continue.